Entwine Exclusive is a weekly series that we developed to fit in this virtual space to really give people a behind-the-scenes look at how JDC responds to global crises, to connect you to our leadership, and to help you feel engaged in the global Jewish world. Before we get to this week's topic, I just want to give a couple of housekeeping tips here on Zoom. We have Miriam monitoring the Q&A and the chat functions. You can feel free to post questions at any time, and we're also going to have a Q&A section at the very end. But we would love to hear from you, so please let us know what you want to ask our speakers. So let's get to it. This week, I'm really pleased to have Sarah Eisenman, who's the Executive Director of JDC Entwine, our fearless leader, and Joy Sisisky, who is a founding member of Entwine and a former Ralph I. Goldman Fellow with us. They both have much longer titles and a lot of background that they can share, so I'll let them get into that a bit later. But these are both women who I really look up to, and I've been looking forward to this session for a long time just to be able to learn from them. So thank you both so much for being here. Today we're going to be exploring themes around leadership, endurance, decision-making, family life, quarantine hobbies, a lot of things that we really hope will resonate with our audience. So we hope that you're open to the vulnerability and the honesty and the fun that will come out of this session. So let me turn it over to Sarah and Joy. If you could both introduce yourselves, tell us a bit about your background, and for fun, what is something one of your kids has said or done recently that has left you speechless to make us laugh a little? Sarah, can we start with you?
Sure, thanks Ariel, and thanks everyone for taking the time. My name is Sarah Eisenman, as Ariel said, and I'm the Executive Director at Entwine. But I've also been a JDC professional for 18 years now, and came to JDC pretty much straight out of college, and have been here for 18 years and also serve as an Assistant Executive Vice President of the organization, which allows me to have kind of a broader global view of everything that we're doing and experiencing and handling in this moment. And personally, you know, I grew up in Southern California, very proud of that, still feel like I'm a Californian at heart, though I've been here in New York for a while. I live in Harlem with my partner and my 2 little girls. And, you know, something that they said recently that most days, everything they say is surprising. But last night, my 5-year-old told me that our 2-year-old had taken away her family, and therefore she was moving to the backyard, and she had had enough. So she was going to move to the backyard last night, and, you know, she packed a suitcase and everything, but fortunately she did fall asleep in her own bed. So that ended well.
That actually sounds kind of nice to move to the backyard right now. Just
I was telling her I have first dibs, not you.
Thank you. And Joy, if you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, I might join you in that backyard too. So I'm Joy Sisisky. I am a former Ralph Goldman Fellow, which Ariel mentioned. I served in Ukraine and Ethiopia, and I've worked in the Jewish community my whole career also. I lived in New York for 16 years and then moved to San Francisco 4 years ago. And I work at the Jewish Federation and Endowment Fund. I serve as the Chief Philanthropy Officer here. So I do a lot of work mostly in fundraising and also in philanthropy and grant making. And before that, I was the Executive Director of the Jewish Women's Foundation in New York, really concentrating on feminist issues, not just in New York, but also around the world. And I have really loved the opportunity to kind of marry my personal interests and my professional interests also through my continued involvement with JDC. And I now serve on the board. I was an early member of Entwine because it was before Entwine. And actually when I was a Ralph Goldman Fellow, Sarah handed me this little piece of paper and she was like, take this with you to Ethiopia. When you get back, like, let me know what you think. And that was like the earliest version of what has become Entwine. And so I was really, you know, lucky to be able to work with Sarah and so many others, some of you who are probably on this call in those early days and served as the first co-chair of the Entwine Steering Committee. So I'm really happy to be back. I'm married and I have 2 kids, 2 little girls. They just turned 7 and 10, so we had quarantine birthdays. And You know, I don't really know who's on the call, and so this could be inappropriate, but I would say it was the most surprising thing is the week before we went into shelter in place, my 4th grader took her first, you know, sex ed class. And so now they're being homeschooled. And so they've expected everything that they were going to do at school is just happening here. And so that class has seemed to have continued and extended into this quarantine. And so it's just like endless questions all the time. And no break, but it's still been, you know, in some ways a silver lining being able to be at home with them and spend more time together.
Wow. So hopefully includes sex ed as part of the curriculum. Which
my resume.
Well, thank you both. Now that we've gotten to know our speakers a bit, we want to get to know who's on the call and get to know our audience members and where you're at currently. So Miriam is going to post a link into the chat to Mentimeter, and click on this link. You can also go to menti.com and enter the code that's there. I'm simultaneously going to share my screen so that you can see the answers as they come in. It should be up and running. And just so you know, all of these questions are totally anonymous. They are a bit personal, but we do not know who is answering what. It's just to give us a sense of who's on the call. So the first question is, tell us about your quarantine experience. Curious who you're home with right now, if you're alone, with roommates, parents, partner, children, and also about your work at the moment. Are you working full-time, part-time, or currently not working? So those results are rolling in, and hopefully everyone should be able to see it on my shared screen. Make sure the chat's going. We'll give this just another minute. It looks like we have a lot of people who have answered. Very diverse range here. Great. Looks like a lot of people are working full-time with a few part-time or not currently working, and a lot of diversity when it comes to who people are at home with right now. I am with my parents for the first time in 10 years, so that's been an interesting adjustment for me. I'm going to move on to the next slide, and it should update on your screens. If it doesn't, you might need to refresh your browser. And here we're asking, since the pandemic started, I have, and there's a scale between agree and disagree, set boundaries between my work life and home life, developed new routines that feel functional, and been supported by my community. Kind of what everyone is feeling at this moment in time. Nice to see that it's mostly towards the agree end on all of these. Would be curious to know the comparison from before COVID to now. Great. So it looks like overall people are kind of definitely leaning towards agree on all of them, and nice to see that people are setting boundaries, but there is definitely that diversity, as you can see when you hover over it. You can see some people were a bit closer to disagree in setting boundaries and some of these routine questions. But a lot of people have felt supported by their community, which is nice to call out. So thank you everyone for participating. I'm gonna go just to this last slide, which is a cartoon that Sarah and Joy shared with me the other day that says, I can't remember, do I work at home or do I live at work? And I'm just gonna keep this up for a minute and turn it back to Sarah and Joy. From your vantage point in leadership positions, what are some of the trends you're seeing in how people are working from home during this shutdown?
Want to start, Sarah?
Sure. Look, I think that I think one of the trends is like everything. It's like all the above you're seeing, and that's kind of an overwhelming viewpoint from a management perspective to see that kind of range of approaches, issues, challenges, what's working, what's not working, and try and figure out how you support a team or respond, or how you, set policies across an organization or support employees. A couple of things that I think are really important in terms of the trends, in terms of working from home. I think this is one of the first times where, when you're engaging with someone in a work setting, it's really relevant to find out, kind of, are people in their home? Maybe not everyone's working. We have a lot of people who are unemployed right now, and that's really hitting people's families and their own lives in unique ways, right? It could be a parent, a partner, a boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever it might be. There could be people yourself who are experiencing that. And I think that that is kind of a unique factor when you're kind of approaching working from home, and the people you're coming in contact with and in conference calls with, that this is actually a really overarching theme in the background of many people's lives. I think another point, and I think Joy mentioned this word yesterday, hopefully she'll say something about it, but just this kind of feeling of being on the marathon. This is like an unreal endurance challenge for all of our employees, for anyone we're engaging with, for ourselves. And so at the same time as a crisis is hitting, we're experiencing that crisis ourselves. And that's a unique factor in this. As a global organization, we're more accustomed to dealing with kind of a crisis out there, over there, that we're responding to and bringing our resources and knowledge to. But at this moment, we're all in it at the same time. So that sense of endurance, I think, is huge. And I also think, two more things that jump out for me, particularly that I think are really relevant, is just how people's roles in their lives are moving and shifting, and maybe not what they're accustomed to, and that you kind of have to be sensitive to that. You may have a family member who's ill or in need, or you need to get groceries, and you need to order groceries for them, for yourself, for someone else, for a neighbor. People's roles are shifting and changing. In my home right now, my partner's taking care of the kids all day. That's a shift in our role. Not that I take care of my kids all day in a normal setting, I'll be honest. I'm at work most of the time, but that shift for him doing that work every day is a real shift for him. So I think that shift in roles for anyone, whether you're with kids, without kids, partnered, not partnered, we're all shifting in our roles, whether it's in our community or in our homes. And the last thing I think that I'm noticing, as in a kind of management leadership role, you're often trying to be very, very careful about invading people's personal space, or being really appropriate about, how much do you ask, do you not know? It's none of your business in a way. And at this moment, you have to be still very careful about that. But really, it kind of should be our business, right? Like, we have to know what's going on with people to the extent that they want to share it and are available to it, but that we have to create some sort of openness to that. And it has to factor in. And I'll be the first to say that's really challenging for me personally. I'm not always, attuned to those things. And so this is a shift, meaning what we once said is, you really don't, get into people's personal space, and not that we are now, but you kind of have to factor it in. I mean, there's death in people's life, there's illness, there's unemployment, there's shifts and changes, and it does factor into a work environment, especially one that's based on Jewish values. So I think those are kind of some big ones I'm seeing.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to pick up. If I showed you, like, I'm in my bedroom, like, I don't really talk about my personal life very often at work. And so to have to be, fully present for the people that I work with and in my job and the role I have, and then to do it in, a 300 square foot bedroom with my kids running in, it's complicated. And I think it gives me certainly more empathy for the other positions that people are in, and the kinds of, situations that they're living in, which may not be where they would normally work. We happen to have a lot of employees who are set up to work from home, so that's great. And we've really leaned on them to give us their best tips for how the rest of us can accommodate. You mentioned, Ariel, that you're at home for the first time in 10 years. So there's this whole other dynamic about being an adult and moving back in with your parents. And how do you have to share things in different ways? How do you have to accommodate not just the people you live with, but the people that you work with? I think it's really important. I think, you know, there have been some articles, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention some of this because we did talk about it in our prep call, but whether or not you were the primary caregiver for your children before, if you have children, those boundaries are totally blurred at home with kids at home running into meetings or changing schedules so that you can help with school at home. Also, like Sarah, my husband is now the primary caregiver for our children and is, you know, teaching our kids full time, but it doesn't mean that I cannot be present or that they don't want me to be present in what's going on. I can't stay in my bedroom with the door locked all day. It's also, you know, for my own mental health, I can't stay in my bedroom all day with the door locked and then go to sleep in my bedroom. It's really just not how humans are meant to interact. But I think, you know, the point in saying it is really not about, you know, whether or not you have kids, but who are you with? Who are you not with? And if you're, you know, alone, I saw many of the people on the survey said that they were sheltering alone, about building empathy for your teammates and the people that you work with, to understand that we have all sorts of situations that we're dealing with that affect, you know, the people around us and our own mental health that need to be taken into consideration when we think about how we work. When we first went into shelter in place here, you know, San Francisco declared a state of emergency really before any other city or county or state. And so we had about 2 weeks to prep to get our staff all ready. There are about 100 of us with computers and a gradual shift to shelter in place, understanding that that was going to come. There are plenty of other folks that I've talked to who just like one day their boss hit the switch and they had to work at home. They didn't have computers. They weren't really sure how they were going to work. Their job required total face-to-face interaction. So it took a long time to find a rhythm. And I am curious on the flip end how people are managing with that as we, you know, get further into this. And, you know, just to, you know, also pick up on what Sarah said, setting policies, but being really flexible about it is important. So we thought, okay, people can just work their regular hours from 8:30 to 5:30, but that doesn't work for a lot of people for a whole bunch of different reasons. I was on a call with a colleague this morning. She works from 8 to 11. And then again from like 4 to, you know, 9 o'clock at night. And that's what makes it work. And so sharing and being in touch with our colleagues has really helped. So we know when we can count on people and when it may not be the right time to get in touch with them, and setting, you know, some boundaries around that just to protect people's personal space, I think is really important. And that's going to be important when we ask people to come back to work. So for those people who are caring for, people who may be immunocompromised or sick and are doing the shopping or the primary caregiving, they may not be able to come back to work right away. If, you know, school's closed for the rest of the year, there's, you know, camps, most of the Jewish summer camps have announced this week that there will be no camp for 2020. So what are kids going to do all summer? So I think we have to build that empathy for the, you know, the positions that people are in, to be able to support them, to make sure that they can come to work and be as present as possible.
Thank you both for that. There's, looking at the poll and then thinking about what you both just said, again, there's this diversity in everyone's experiences. And thinking about Entwine and JDC, there, so much of what we do is focused on relationships, whether it's here with our Entwine community in North America or in Israel, or globally with our clients. How has shifting to this virtual space impacted the way our organization has looked at relationships and thought about interacting with the JDC community at large?
So I think it's kind of, again, one of these really multi-layered questions. Thanks, Ariel. But I think, you know, there's a couple things. One, similar to what Joy was saying, you know, JDC also had to figure out in a relatively short time span, really over the course of 2 weeks, how do you move 1,000 employees in different countries to work from home? with really very different setups at home, you know, different availability for, you know, wireless. You know, here we take for granted that everyone has wireless, but that's just not the case for, you know, some of, you know, employees in different parts of the world, or laptops or this or that. And sometimes people's work can't be done so easily from home. And how do we think about that? And so I think this question of relationships, you know, first and foremost was in the initial period, thinking about how you move so many people to work from home and that range of needs. And what comes to mind is something that we've kind of said with Entwine, which is like, we really want to put people at the center of what we do. And we say that, and sometimes it's hard to always put your finger on what that means, right? But I think about that belief, that commitment to people are at the center of what we're about and what we're doing, is kind of at the core of all of the approaches right now. Yes, we're an organization, and we have a mission, and we have this and that and policies, but putting people at the center, I think, is something we can keep coming back to. And I think about two points around like the impact on approach. One, again, goes back to that question of diversity. And I think that keeping in mind that there's a whole range here, and we see, you know, at least, you know, here in North America, you know, if you're a person of color, how this crisis is impacting, you know, people in this country in very different ways. If you're unemployed, if your employment has been reduced, if you're alone, if you're home with your parents, there is this huge range. You know, are people in your family an essential worker or someone you're close to? All of this great range really drives trends around how we're all experiencing that. And if we put people at the center, we have to at least attempt to respond to that. We may not get it right, and we probably won't get it right all the time, and we may not be perfect. And I think that maybe that's perhaps one of the things that, you know, even said on a phone call with a colleague yesterday who was trying to figure out some HR policies. We're just not going to be perfect right now. And I think of also one of Joy's co-chairs, Annie, who has shared that with me before, you know, like perfection is not the end goal here, and that we have to do our best. And I think if we can put that focus on people and that range and diversity of how people are experiencing this, and how people in our own community, in the Jewish community, are experiencing this, then we can get closer, you know, to doing our best. And I think the other piece around like the impact on approach is, you know, and it may be a little, hopefully people don't think of this as too opportunistic, but there's always an opportunity in a crisis. And that's something I've seen and I've learned at JDC from, you know, colleagues and mentors along the way, that, and I think of kind of, you know, JDC employees from many, you know, decades ago who, you know, who've written books on this, right? With that very title, you know, the crisis as an opportunity. And what can we find in this, that coming out the other end, we're going to be even stronger and better. And so I think that making that quick pivot to figuring out where is that opportunity and what can we do right now. And so at Entwine, one of the things we did was, we're not going to take weeks and weeks to figure out, you know, there's a whole host of programs we can't run. Well, what can we do? We still have a mission to meet. That's not going away. And we're all blessed to be working at this moment. So what are we doing right now? And how do we meet our mission? And how do we meet our mission to our people? And the focus was on, well, we want to reach every single person in our database. And those of you listening who are an alum, you're probably frightened right now that you're going to get lots of emails or phone calls. But the truth is, we want to reach everyone to the best we can. And we're at about 1,000 people right now that we've personally one-to-one reached out to. And it's totally okay if someone doesn't respond to us or write us back, but we're going to contact every one of those people. And we're going to double down on that personal approach to reaching people, to connecting with them, and whether it's these kind of virtual sessions, but doubling down on people and reaching out to people. And for me, that's the opportunity in this, right? To remind ourselves of that and do that hard work now.
I love that because, you know, one of the approaches that we take here in San Francisco at, you know, in the work that I do is really about community building and also bonding, which I think is really important. And as, you know, Zoom has, you know, the pandemic has taken away our ability to really touch and feel other people. And Zoom's flattened it in some ways so that we can be even more connected. And so how can we take advantage of that opportunity to, I use, that term kind of loosely, but to really bond in ways that we couldn't do before or might not have been a priority when we took for granted all the things we could do in person. And, I love the question. And I think, one of the things that Sarah picked up on is this idea of marginalized people, whoever they are in our community, whether they are women, low income, people of color, I think what this pandemic has done is really shown the rest of us in some ways what marginalized people have always known, that the system is not fair, that education, health, employment, transportation don't work in favor of marginalized people. And so I would answer, your question from a leadership lens to say that it's really the leader's job to look around corners where other people can't, so that when this is over, it doesn't look the same as it did before. This is a huge opportunity for us to make changes in ways that we might not have been motivated to do before, that we might not have had the impetus to do before. And having worked in social change for a very long time, particularly on women's issues, the door is really wide open to do that now and to think, really broadly about how people's identities are intersecting during the course of the pandemic and then making the most of it. We want to build resiliencies in the communities that we live in, and we belong to many communities. And we want to take care of each other. We want to make sure that we're safe. And I think it's a great opportunity to create not just new policies, but new traditions, new ways that we can be together that won't look the same as they did before, which really highlighted, I think the inequity in this country in particular has been really highlighted through this pandemic. So I hope that leaders at institutions like ours, nonprofits, government agencies, public schools can really take advantage of the opportunity to do that right now.
Thank you both for that. Speaking of resilience, curious to hear what is a Jewish value that is guiding both of you right now during these times?
So I have a bunch on my list. I was thinking about this question, and I had mentioned it to you guys before. I'm not.
Noticed I didn't jump right out. Go ahead, Joy.
I'm not particularly religious, but there are a lot of Jewish traditions that I really love and have sometimes become more meaningful at different periods of time in my life. So right now we're between Passover and the Jewish holiday of Shavuot, which marks, Passover marked our escape from slavery, but in the story, we're not actually free. We work towards freedom in the days between Passover and Shavuot when we gain that freedom. And it's a period of about 7 weeks. And during that time, it's, you're supposed to count each day and you're counting up towards Shavuot. It's called the counting of the Omer. And there are just so many parallels right now with the fact that we're kind of counting down to when shelter in place is going to be over. And each of those 7 weeks represents a different Jewish value: loving kindness, justice, compassion, endurance, humility, bonding, and leadership. And this week we're in week 4 of the counting of the Omer. We're just about to end it tonight, and it's about endurance. And I never really thought in particular about endurance as a Jewish value, but it permeates so many different things in our lives. It's about balance and patience and persistence. And so much of that resonates in kind of the master story that I have around my experience in the Jewish community, but it's also about being reliable and accountable to each other. And I think the further we are physically, the harder we have to work at doing it. It's not just about getting through the shelter in place, but really thinking about, what keeps us alive, what drives us, what counts, and what are we going to go all the way for? And I think all of those things really require love and compassion in ways that are not harsh or aggressive. And I think, it depends on how you kind of define the term endurance, but if you can think about it in really compassionate, loving terms, I think endurance is a really great value that I can lean on from the Jewish tradition. And I do that in so many different ways that aren't even like, count, like I don't physically do the prayer for the counting of the Omer, but it's really a meditation. So I take that to another level. And, you know, for those of you who know me, I do a lot of yoga, and my yoga teacher is also a meditation teacher. And I shared with you guys in advance of this call a podcast that he had done with his brother, who's an endurance athlete. He runs 100-mile marathons, and my yoga teacher does 10-day silent meditation retreats. And they are both considered endurance athletes, but for totally different reasons. And there's just so much about the similarity in meditation around counting the Omer that I think is so important. And the one takeaway from the podcast, which is really, you don't have to do anything leading up to it. It's not like running a marathon. You don't actually have to train for it. You can just do it. And I think that value around endurance, which doesn't take a special skill, it just takes the desire to want to do it, is so important. And so it's very similar to meditation in that way, which is it's available to everybody. And, you know, how we take advantage of it during this crisis, you know, could mean a lot to people.
Take myself off mute here. Yeah, so I think that there's not much I can really say after Joy just said that when it comes to Jewish values. But no, what I will say won't be any surprise to people. I think from the very beginning, all of this whole, if we ever wondered about the interconnectedness of all of us and the interconnectedness of the Jewish people, this moment also is a great reminder of that interconnectedness and what's at the underpinning of all that Entwine is about. And I would argue that all that JDC is about, this sense and commitment to our Arevut and Jewish mutual responsibility, and that we are guarantors for each other, and we have to have each other's back. And I think that there's, it's cliche, I'm the executive director, so everyone's like, of course she's going to say that, but I actually really believe it too. So I guess I'm in the right spot. But I think that value is very, very clear right now. And it's very clear why we, why it's at the center of all that we're about.
And muted you by accident. And speaking of putting people at the center of our work, we have some really great questions from the audience. So I want to turn it over to some of them. The first one I want to ask is, what are some of the greatest needs you are seeing in our communities? In Joy's case, in the local community in San Francisco, and Sarah, if you could share a bit about the global community, and adding on to that, how can we leverage Jewish communities around the world to respond to those needs?
Yeah, I think we did a needs assessment in our community. We have the 4th largest Jewish community here in the Bay Area. It's a 9-county geographic region. And I'm on the phone weekly with all of my colleagues from the top 15 or 20 other big Jewish community centers around the United States. I happen to have just got off a call with them right before this one. And I think what they found in the needs assessment is very similar across the country. There's two kind of buckets of need. One is human need. And, I'm really curious to hear what Sarah will have to say about this, because she does a lot of work in this area in particular. The second is around supporting the ecosystem. So one is helping people where they are right now. They're losing jobs. They can't put food on the table. They may not be able to make rent. So what is the immediate urgent humanitarian assistance that's needed? And that's kind of phase 1 of the needs assessment that we've looked at and where we've focused our grant making. The second area, which we're moving into right now, is around, I think it would be a step too far to say stabilizing, but to support the Jewish ecosystem, to make sure that institutions can make the decisions that they need to. Not that we're choosing who stays in business, who should not be in business, but really to level set so that institutions, boards, leadership can make those decisions in their communities. Jewish preschools, Jewish camps are closed. JCCs, we have 6 of them here in the Bay Area. They're all closed. All of their workers have been furloughed. How do we take care of the workers, but how do we get them back on their feet, and how are those decisions going to be made? So we're kind of looking at it right now from a needs assessment point in terms of those 2 buckets and toggling between the 2 when we make our decisions. it's pretty staggering, the need.
Yeah, I think what I would add from a global perspective, I think it's very similar in that maybe what's different is the availability of kind of government or nonprofit sector support in different parts of the world. But I think, first and foremost, there's great human need that we're seeing in communities around the world. And I think what obviously comes to mind, and I hope people will be able to check out JDC's response to the pandemic in communities around the world. What comes to mind very much are, those folks, and Joy mentioned, the kind of marginalized in our community. There are, hundreds and thousands of marginalized people in our, Jewish community around the world. And, those same people are being hit very hard by this crisis. And I think of the elderly clients that we serve in the former Soviet Union. People really still need home care, but how do you deliver home care in a moment right now that is safe for the client as well as the worker, right? And how do you do that? And we're doing it. And the volunteers who are showing up to do, deliver food and do that work. So I think there's real need that relates to those who are marginalized, regularly. I hate to use that word, but who were struggling before this and are really in acute need and can't go without the help that they rely on right now. And I think the other point that we're seeing is that, and hopefully it's a temporary need, but there are new human needs, and some of this might hit younger families and younger people who are out of work and experiencing hardship. And we're particularly seeing this in parts of Europe where there are really new human needs. And what JDC is doing in that is really trying to get involved on what we hope will be a temporary basis to kind of help the local communities and parts of Europe to respond to this new demographic of need, and hopefully come out the other end where people are self-sufficient again. And this is not an ongoing issue, but we see the similar issues that Joy was mentioning. There's need right now. And then I think the other need that we're seeing, and I'm reminded of a quote that our colleague Felicia Herman from Natan posted on her Facebook feed. She's had a few doozies on the quotes these days, and one of them was from Rabbi Yitz Greenberg about kind of how do we respond in crisis. And first and foremost, we think of the human need and responding, but that the body doesn't go without the soul, right? And that at the same time, we have to think about all of those investments that we've made that are part of our community, and that's all around Jewish life. And those questions of how we keep Jewish life afloat. We're all pivoting right now and doing whatever we can virtually or personal outreach. But to that point of keeping those core Jewish programs and the kind of soul, the soul of our community, afloat, and keep investing in it even at this time, because we know when we come out the other side, I personally feel that there's going to be an even greater demand for all of those programs, the need for intimacy, for being together, for community, for being in person with each other, I think is going to be great. And so how do we keep those things like Sarvash and other programs that are so important to Jewish life around the world? How do we keep them going right now so that, that immediately that day after, when there's a huge demand, they're there, right? So I think that's what we're seeing, which is fairly similar, but obviously different because of the context.
Thank you. We have a lot of good questions, so I'm trying to pick which ones we can get through in this time. I think I'll ask one of each of you. Did you say something, Sarah?
I was just going to say, don't pick any questions from Andrew if he's asking.
From Andrew specifically. I think I'll ask each of you one question. This one's for Sarah. As Joy stated in the beginning, that Entwine kind of started with this piece of paper that you had handed her. So there's a question: what advice can you share for making an idea into a reality?
There's endless learnings from kind of building Entwine, going from an idea to 30,000 strong network. So there's a bunch of learnings. I would say two, in the interest of time, that come to mind. I would say, and I think people on the team have heard me say this, that you have to take every opportunity and blow it out. So what maybe feel like a really, really small opportunity to do something, do it and do it really well and knock it out, because then you've just taken that little bitty opportunity and all of a sudden now it's this big, and then it's going to be this big, and then it's going to keep, right? So whatever opportunity you're given, don't look at it as small. You know, knock it out of the park, blow it away, and you'll keep opening, you know, more opportunity to build out whatever you're passionate about. And I think the second thing that comes to mind is, you know, ideas are only half the battle. You got to be a doer. So you got to do it. And so we all have great ideas, but you got to implement and you got to do it. And that takes a lot of grinding. But implementing is the other side of the piece of paper. So, you know, focus on that.
And I know the question was for Sarah, but I will say that partnership has been key to success for me in everything, no matter what it was I was working on. And I'll say for, you know, Entwine in particular, there's no better partner than Sarah on any of this work, because she's both an ideas person and a doer. And she gets other people to do stuff. And, you know, I would ask myself that too, like, can you get other people, you know, to do stuff with you?
Great, thank you. And I guess, Joy, I think I just really like this question pretty quickly. How do you raise leaders at home? How do you get your kid? We talked a bit about gender roles and some challenges as women in leadership. How do you raise your kids to lift each other up, no matter their gender? Sarah, probably also
question. They're, you know, they're either at each other's throat or looking for their own private space or camping in the backyard. We have a tent set up in the living room. It's a really good question. Here's what I'll say is I am participating right now as a Wexner Heritage Fellow. So it's a, you know, like essentially like a 2-year Torah study program that you do with about 20 people from your own city. And we're coming to the end of our 2 years. We meet every other Wednesday for like 4 or 5 hours to study Torah and text, and also talk about a whole range of issues. And now that I've been home, I will say the one thing, you know, blurring the professional and the personal is that, you know, these classes are at night, they're on Zoom, and my daughter now sits in the room and she listens in, and she's 10 years old. And I don't know that she can appreciate and understand everything that we're talking about, but what I want her to remember from this is that I cared a lot about something. And what I cared about, you know, at this time was like deepening my relationships with people in, you know, my community, which is a, you know, a small Jewish community here, but also learning the things that you can take away. And I'd say, you know, that was true for me when I was at Entwine too. When I started getting involved with the work of Entwine and JDC, I was not married and I did not have kids. And as I kind of matured as a person and moved into different places in my life, I always included my kids in that too. And, you know, right after the earthquake in Haiti, which was a long time ago now, I had a baby, like that was an infant. And it was actually one of the first Entwine trips I think that we ever took that was organized. And it was a handful of people who went to go and volunteer and see what was going on. And one of the kids at a school that we visited said, like, why would you leave your baby? Like, you must be like a terrible mother. I remember this was 10, you know, almost 10 years ago. And I thought, you know, and I said back to this kid, but it stuck with me. Like, I want my kids to remember that there's a world much bigger than just, you know, our family unit, and that there are people in our family they should take care of, in our community that they should take care of, and of course in the world that they should take care of. And I couldn't think of a better example than just like doing it. To your point, Sarah, also about being a doer and just showing them that there are lots of ways that they can contribute and become leaders, I guess.
It's funny that Joy shared that story, because when you asked Joy the question, I was going to say what I have to tell about what I've learned from Joy, because I'm a little newer to this, you know, kid game than her. I remember learning from Joy really early on, and this feeling of, you know, and these are questions that don't get asked to many other professionals, but, you know, how do you travel so much, or how do you work so, and how do you go out and do these things that wouldn't be asked to maybe other folks in the workforce? And I think the thing that you want your kids to see is that those things matter. And I remember Joy telling me about that. And I remember that story on the trip because I was with her in Haiti. And I still remember that all the time, about, you know, I might be leaving and I might be going somewhere, but they're watching me do it. And I'm doing it for a reason, right?
Well, thank you both so much for all of this. I'm going to quickly wrap up, but also I want to share a couple of things with our audience. And if anyone needs to hop off, that's totally fine. Firstly, we want to hear from you what advice you have about building endurance during this time. So Miriam's going to post another link to the Mentimeter, which you can fill out at any time. We're going to share out the answers in an email tomorrow. We'll also share the articles and podcasts that Sarah and Joy have mentioned. We also got some other great questions, so we can try to put some answers together for those as well. A couple of things coming up with Entwine tomorrow. We are celebrating Shabbat in partnership with One Table at 1 p.m. Eastern time tomorrow, Friday. So we hope that you can join us for that. We are also launching a new round of our book club early next week. So keep an eye out for details for how to sign up. And then our next Entwine exclusive is going to be on May 20th. And that will be an update on the impact of COVID-19 in India, which should be a really interesting topic to dive into. You can find all of these details and much more on our website on the thread. You can register for all of these programs. And lastly, just want to share that when I close out of this webinar, a survey should pop up on your screen. We want your feedback. We want to be creating what our community is looking for during this time. So please let us know how we're doing and what ideas you have for programs that we can create. And those are all of my announcements. Sarah and Joy, thank you so much again for joining us. This was really, really wonderful. And I feel like we could talk for 10 more hours together. But some people ask for contact information, so we can share that out. And I hope everyone has a relaxing weekend and a Shabbat Shalom and stays healthy. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks
Thank you
for including me. Shabbat Shalom.
Yeah, thanks for taking me out of my emails. This is good.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Be well.